So I very often go through Title Tuesday games on chess.com. Is you have a lot of the best players in the world playing lines that can be interesting. And I'll say when looking at a lot of openings from, say, a correspondence perspective, where it's engine versus engine, when days and days of a human guiding them to beat some lines to absolute death, some things aren't holding up anymore. I say I played the King's Indian for many, many years, and the classical variation, it's getting difficult. I mean, there was a reason that Scary Gary Kasparov dropped it in the 90s to go for more solid things that we're seeing at the top level today. But occasionally, you'll have players play the King's Indian still, and one of those that I'm a big fan of, and you can see him on the channel as well, Grandmaster Narodistky. And in this game, I feel he plays, from an engine perspective, the most solid system against the classical. And I will make note here that in my text on Chessable, the Benoni Simplified, there is another path here to an interesting position with c5. And a very likely move is d5. And we've got both lines covered with ED and CD. But generally, the theme that you need to remember is bishop g4, get rid of the piece. As White's main plan in the position, White wants to go knight d2, knight c4, bishop f4, and pile up on the Benoni pawn. And a lot of these lines, in my experience, they'll allow us to take on f3. We go queen e7, knight d7, get the knight out of the way, and you trade off the dark square bishop and can play on the king side. And that's relatively all you need to know to play this system at a high level. The engine doesn't like it at first, but when you get to about move 12, move 13, the space advantage starts working to be, well, where's the plan for White? We have a clear plan. White doesn't. And those types of positions I love, as we'll see time and again, humans will mess them up. Well, back to our main game here. Naroditsky goes with the classical King's Indian with e5. And there's a lot of different options for White here, whether it be the Petrosian variation, so the Gligerich, and then the exchange. And I personally, especially when playing against lower rated players, don't want to allow any position where they can play an exchange variation, because they will. You want to keep complications. So I know Gawain Jones in his lifetime repertoire on the King's Indian on Chessable, he started recommending knight bd7. And years ago, Grandmaster Perelstein on chess.com had a series where he recommended knight a6 here. And I like both of those moves if you're a King's Indian player when playing against lower rated players, as the exchange doesn't have the same bite. And it doesn't take you all the way to move, say, 17 or so, with your opponent just needing to memorize a line. The more room you give a lower-rated opponent to go wrong, the more chances they have to go wrong, and you outplay them. It's just that simple. Well, Naroditsky was in a bit of a solid mood today, facing the mainline classical with castles, and plays this move, e takes d4. And after knight takes, rook e8, putting pressure on the pawn. All this is pretty straightforward. Now, theory has been evolving in these lines, and I believe Kamil Plichka had a King's Indian course on Chessable that covers these. And these lines in particular, where on move 9, black has c6 and knight c6. And I feel that the lines with c6 are a bit risky, because white has this Maroczy bind structure. You're going to have to play very accurately with black to know after c6 when to play d5, or you're very likely going to be left with d6 being a weakness when white can just pile everything up on the d file, simply move a knight. So I don't like to be positionally squeezed. So c6 makes me a bit nervous. So when I was looking at these lines, Naroditsky played knight c6. And the first thing to question is, well, what happens if white just takes? Okay, we get the double pawns, but this keeps the c3 knight out of the forward squares. And after bishop g5, I'm like, all right, I don't want to deal with a pin. Go away, please. Bishop e6. We've got development. White's got a Maroczy bind, but we don't have the need to try to break anything. We can maneuver. We can slow play. Knight d7. Queen e7. We're just putting the question to things, proving our pieces. And now queen f6, where we're looking to play rook d8 and eventually g4. The thing about bind positions, it's hard to be aggressive and press opponents. So if you like slow, maneuvering, positional type games, this knight c6 line could very well be for you, as knight takes c6 is played pretty frequently. Now the main line is bishop e3. So there are some potential tactics in these positions, but we're going to show the most solid line covered. We got knight h5. And just because a position is drawish doesn't mean it's drawn in a practical game. Queen d2, overprotecting the f4 square, and you know what? We want the f4 square anyway. Tactics abound. And after rook fd1, takes. And normally when I see this kind of position, like I would take white 100% of the time. Knight versus bishop, doesn't look like the best bishop. So the main point of entry into the position is still d5 for the knight. All we've got to do is get our bishop eyeing that square, and we're good. So b6, bishop b7. And it's interesting because the engine gives a slight edge to white here, but there's absolutely nothing objectively. And this is a position that you can play forever if you're patient. Rook ac1, queen g5. And Naroditsky's not alone in playing this position. So after knight d5, takes, rook e7. This was also played between Rajabov and Carlsen in 2021. And this is a position where I think a lot of players would be satisfied with taking a draw, especially in like a norm tournament type situation. But one of my favorite things about watching players like Naroditsky, he's an uncompromising player. He doesn't quit. He typically is playing with a lot of creativity and gusto. I mean, what's not fun about that? It's going for the 2-point conversion every time you have the opportunity. That's the way he plays. So let's see how he's able, with slightly less space, slightly worse position, can muddy the waters a little bit versus his grandmaster opponent and get blood from a stone and get a win from this position. Queen d2. All right, first and foremost, if you're trying to make something happen, do you want to be trading more? No. So we're going to keep the tension. And on rook c4, the main access to our camp is the open c file bothering our c pawn. If you wait around, white's going to get just a perma-clamp and get Alekhine's gun going, maybe even get a pawn all the way to b5. So you need to act quickly here. b5. Well, at least we have convinced white to leave the attack on the c file. We need counterplay, activity, take some risk. You want to win? You got to risk it. f5. On queen d3, well, you're bothering our b pawn. Can't have that. Still trying to bother us? All right. Again, we got to take risks. Boom. We'll trade, but more healthy pawns are being traded on one side than the other. I think it's very easy to just get complacent here and make a move like rook takes a6. But already, after getting the queen to go away, we're starting to break through in the center, and black's the one with just a booger's worth there. Just a little bit to work with. Well, of course, it said Narodistky likes to muddy the waters, and he's gone for this line, allowing e takes f5. So how can you continue the attack here? What would you do? Hopefully you saw rook e2 with the big threat, rook takes g2, followed by a subsequent mate. White's got to play rook g4 to stop it. Now, it looks like black's in big trouble, but I'll tell you, the engine eval here, 0.00. You're completely fine with black. Let's play accurately. That's what it takes in these types of positions. How can you press? Well, activate that last piece, threatening rook e1. So white needs to get some freedom in the position with h4 for the king. Check. And queen b6 was actually a big error that white could have capitalized on. There are a few moves, rook e1 or rook 8 to e5. I'm a little bit more of a fan of rook e1, as we can keep it going with queen e5 here. And queen takes f5 is a blunder due to the pin. So queen a1, and black still has an advantage here, as after a move like f takes, rook h1, and try to find the devastating tactical sequence here. Well, pretty straightforward. Queen e1, followed by rook f1, where you got to give up the queen. But again, Title Tuesday, 3-2 games. Not a lot of time. Queen b6, followed by queen f2. White's breaking through, +8. Narodistky does win this game, though. Again, this is his style. He lives on the edge of the knife. He takes risks, even from solid positions like this. So how can you make the most of this bad situation? Keep it complicated. Stay in the game. h5. Don't just open up the king. Do whatever you can to stay in. Okay, queen f5. Queen f7 is being threatened. Got to stop that. But notice, he doesn't go pure defense like the engine's saying, because this is your only chance. You know, the Hail Mary. So we're going for rook 8 to e7. And there's that first inaccuracy. Queen takes h5. So now we just get a little bit more tactical potential here for things to go wrong. It's getting worse. And it's easy to tense up in these positions, but easiest, just queen g5. Get ready. What are they going to do about you pushing the pawn? Simple, effective. But it's hard. I've been in these situations where after the game, looking at it, you go, well, why didn't I just do this? In the intensity and the tension of the moment, everyone makes mistakes, even top players. But rook g1 was played. Now queen f2. Having time for rook e5 now, which we didn't earlier. This is allowing the trade. And sometimes they'll trade from a big advantage like this because they're just low on time and they're looking to simplify the position so they don't get into any trouble. But the advantage that white had at +12 has now dwindled to a little bit more than half a pawn. So let's see how the game continues. King g7. Grab. We're going to use the a pawn as a distraction. That's bait. Double threat. Very important. Control the base pawn. Making sure this pawn isn't going anywhere. Keeping the king out with opposition. And looking to mosey over to the pawn at some point. Check. And this is definitely a blunder. Best from white is likely g3. Just waiting. Because if rook c3, I am going to wait to play here. And I'm going to force you to justify. I'm just going to go back and forth. But I think white was probably in the mindset that I was winning, and it's hard to drop that. And he plays a forcing move, and now the evaluation goes from 0.0 all the way to +8. The engine already sees black winning this game, and Naroditsky shows impeccable technique. Takes. Let's not lose our rook from any check tactics. So rook c4, protecting the base pawn. Now rook e7. King gets in finally. You can't stop from grabbing the pawn. You want to grab the right way with the king. And now it's the 2-for-none special. And white had enough and or ran out of time in the game. So hopefully you enjoyed this exploration into ideas in the classical King's Indian. That I do think this e takes d4, I mean, when we're looking at it with the engine, it is the most solid way to play. But if you're looking for alternatives at knight a6 or knight bd7, especially what Gawain Jones recommended, interesting ways to play. Or, you could take a look at the Benoni course too. All right, that's it for this one.